This is Netroots Radio. Rejoin our show already in progress. This is Netroots Radio. Rejoin our show already in progress. This is Netroots Radio. Rejoin our show already in progress. This is Netroots Radio. Rejoin our show already in progress.
Next, background briefing with Ian Masters. This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Netrootsradio.com. To netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again. You gotta tell him. You gotta tell him.
Promise, Tiger. I promise. I'll tell the exchange.
You tell everybody. Listen to me, Hatcher. You gotta tell him. Silent Green is people. We gotta stop him somehow.
NetRootsRadio.com.
This is Netroots Radio. Rejoin our show already in progress. Radio. Rejoin our show already in progress.
1 in 6 Americans get sick from eating contaminated food each year. Contamination caused by salmonella is especially common. It's sometimes found in poultry, eggs, ground beef, pork, and even peanut butter. To reduce your risk from this and other foodborne germs, remember to clean, separate, cook, and chill. Clean your hands with soap and water. Separate raw meat, poultry, and seafood from other foods. Wash counters, cutting boards, and utensils before and after using them. Cook all food thoroughly and use a food thermometer to make sure food is cooked. Promptly chill meat, poultry, eggs, and other perishables. Finally, don't prepare food for others if you're sick, and be extra careful when you prepare food for children, pregnant women, the elderly, or people in poor health. To learn more about making food safer to eat, visit www.cdc.gov/vital-signs.
Oseo, West City Dawadon. Each year, more than 200,000 people are hospitalized with flu. Like all Americans, Native peoples and tribal communities need to protect themselves. Flu spreads mainly from person to person through coughing or sneezing. People can also get infected by touching something with flu viruses on it and then touching their mouth or nose. Most people with the flu have mild symptoms, but pregnant women, young children, the elderly, and people with illnesses like asthma, diabetes, or heart disease are more likely to suffer from serious complications. Protect yourself, your family, and your community from the flu. Get vaccinated every year. Cover your coughs and sneezes. Wash your hands often, and if you're sick, stay home. Protect the circle of life. Know the facts about the flu.
Some conversations are more important than others. The one you...
This is Netroots Radio. Rejoin our show already in progress. Roots Radio. Rejoin our show already in progress.
Live everywhere. Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right, how about this? I didn't know what else to play when we decided to come back on the air. I decided, okay, we've got a reboot, and it looks like it's working, and we're back on the air, and hopefully you haven't given up and run away just yet. And I thought, you know what I need is music that says, thank you for waiting through our technical difficulties. Now, here's the show again. So, Fripp, maybe, I don't know, we'll come up with something. Otherwise, I just thought, all right, I'll play the introduction. That'll be a pretty good indication that we're back on the air. I guess the other things I could play, I have sound effects. What else can I do here? Oh, here we go.
Thank you, God!
Thank you for putting us back on the air, God.
Of course, dude. That is cool.
It is cool that we're back on the air. And what was wrong with this technical setup? I really don't know, but I know this much.
Unacceptable!
That is true. And yet, here we are. Okay, so let's see, I've run through just about every sound effect I think I could think of to play here. But we're back on. And that is cool. So, there we go. Wow, okay. Oh, you had a clip that says, let's join the program already in progress. That's nice. That's a good thought, Justice. You're a professional. You really know what you're doing. Okay. Boy, this intro clip is long. All this music. It really works at the introduction of things. And when you're coming back right in the middle, geez, I don't know. All right. Well, at any rate, some of you said you enjoyed my rapping on the air, which I guess is what it sounded like. I'll be curious to hear it, but you know what? I don't think I can because it won't be on my end in the recording. So we'll just take your word for it and say it sounded cool. And hey, why not now use the opportunity to get to the article that Robert was asking for, assuming he's still with us. I don't know. It wasn't that long that we were hung up, was it? Although, if you're just repeating one word out over and over, I could see you could give up pretty easily on that. Nolan Major says he did. Hopefully, he got the message that we were coming back. Here we are. And back and ready, and we'll take a look at this 1% jokes and plutocrats in drag, what I saw when I crashed a Wall Street secret society. Not me. I didn't crash anything. But Kevin Roos did on behalf of New York Magazine, or at least this is where the reports about it ended up. And I'm looking at the photo montage, really, illustrating this thing. Pictures of folks in drag. So yes, Greg was quite right. They still do that at this thing. And this has actually got Greek letters associated with it. Kappa, Beta, Phi. And I'm curious, what is that? Is it a joke? Let's see. Wikipedia, which will settle all questions about what is and isn't a joke, as far as I know, has this to say about Kappa Beta Phi. It is a secret society. Of course, most fraternities are. Not Delta Upsilon, by the way, non-secret. There are very many non-secret fraternities out there. Back in the, 19th century, when people were getting upset about secret societies, and we're still upset about secret societies, there was a big deal about starting non-secret fraternities. But whatever, I don't know. They call them secret societies, and that sounds scary. But mostly, it's just people, drinking beer. The Moose Lodge, or like the lodge from, what is that one? When Peggy Sue got married. Mostly, they just play cards and drink beer, and there's nothing secret about it except that they don't want anybody to know what they're doing. I don't know how much they're going to drink. Bill in Portland, Maine, by the way, saying, we were in that loop for 5 days and it's Monday. Welcome back. I would believe that in a heartbeat. And I wish it was true because I have a lot coming up between now and Monday, and I wish it was all over with already. All right, well, Kappa Beta Phi, according to Wikipedia, is a secret society best known for its Wall Street chapter that is made up of high-ranking financial executives. They rank highly. I don't know if they're high at the time, but it sounds like they might be. The purpose of the organization is largely social and honorific. The current honor society meets once a year at a black tie dinner to induct new members. The current president is Alfred E. Smith IV, which is interesting because earlier Bill had pointed out that this dinner was a little bit more akin to the Alf Smith dinner rather than the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I think that's probably a much better a parallel than anything else. Meanwhile, this is in fact currently chaired or presided over, I guess, by Alfred E. Smith IV, who, well, hell, I don't even want to go into it. At any rate, the history of chapters of Kappa Beta Phi, there's more than one chapter, in fact, and that was my original intent in looking this thing up. They were known to exist as early as 1912. By the 1930s, dozens of chapters were in existence, primarily on college campuses. The society was known for being made up of men with a sense of humor. So I guess that's where they're coming from. I don't know if they're still made up. Now they're made up of men with money who think that's funny. Many colleges and traditional fraternities fought to abolish Kappa Beta Phi, as it was often characterized as a fraternity solely for drinking and partying while making a mockery of academics and more reputable organizations such as Phi Beta Kappa. You see, you get it? It's Phi Beta Kappa backwards. So it's anti-intellectual in its origins and loves to make fun of this. I'm okay with that. And so is Rand Paul, who was, of course, in his own sort of secret society while he was at college that was dedicated to drinking and making fun of stuff. Just want to point that out there. So apparently they make fun of Phi Beta Kappa to the extent that these gentlemen of wit and humor decided to call their fraternity the opposite of Phi Beta Kappa. Kappa Beta Phi. You see, things were different in 1912. It was funny to tie an onion to your belt, I guess. Anyway, the Wall Street chapter of Kappa Beta Phi was founded in 1929, prior to the stock market crash. It's a good thing it was around to lift their spirits afterwards. Later, I guess the entire fraternity jumped off the top of a building, but it was funny when they did it. I don't know. Anyway, it's the only remaining chapter of the society, so that tells you something too. The stated purpose of the Wall Street chapter is to keep alive the spirit of the good old days of 1928 to 1929. So there's still some kind of sense of humor there too. It's just gallows humor. What else can we tell you about it? It's got traditions. The name is a reversal of Phi Beta Kappa, and instead of a key, the members wear a fob tied to a red ribbon around their necks. Ha ha! Ha! Sense of humor. I love it. The organization's officers bear odd titles such as Grand Swipe, the president, Grand Smudge, Grand Loaf, and Master at Arms, and Chief Executive Officer as well. The annual dinner has been described by the Wall Street Journal as part Friars Club roast, part gong show. New inductees are expected to perform in a variety show to entertain the members, and many inductees benefit from professional coaches and writers to prepare them for their performances. See, they don't do anything themselves. Greg was right. Backed by a 5-piece band, not 6. That would be excessive. The inductees perform renditions of well-known tunes with lyrics modified to satirize Wall Street. Kappa Beta Phi's insignia consists of a beer stein, a champagne glass, a pointing hand, and 5 stars. The group's Latin motto, Dum vivamus, edimus et biberemus, roughly translates to, while we live, we eat and drink. That is hilarious. Members of the Wall Street chapter, about 15 to 20 new members are inducted each year. Historically, the organization has inducted top executives of Wall Street firms, including Michael Bloomberg, John Corzine, Lawrence D. Fink, CEO of BlackRock. I didn't tell you who the first two were because I presumed that you knew. Lawrence D. Fink, CEO of BlackRock, is next. Richard Grasso, former head of the New York Stock Exchange. David Komansky, former CEO of Merrill Lynch. Sally Krawcheck, former head of Citigroup's Wealth Management Division. Kenneth Langone, who's been much in the news lately, right? Former chair of the New York Stock Exchange Compensation Committee. But why was Langone recently in the news? Yes, American businessman and investor, best known for co-founding Home Depot and recently a screw the poor's guy and we're awesome, etc., etc. I think that's what done it. Martin Lipton, founding partner of Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz. Also much in the news, as I recall, but now I can't put my finger on it. Alan Schwartz, former president of Bear Stearns. Mary Shapiro, chairperson of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Diana Taylor, former New York State superintendent of banks. Sanford Weil, how does he pronounce that one? Former CEO of Citigroup. John C. Whitehead, former chair of Goldman Sachs and Company. Of course, I guess John Corzine fits in that category too, but he's listed as former governor of New Jersey. Anyway, so that's the dry and unfunny part about how funny these guys are. And let's look at what's hilarious. According to Kevin Roos, anyway. I mean, I don't think he's crediting them with being hilarious. That's not the case. Okay, recently, our nation's financial chieftains have been feeling a little unloved. Venture capitalists are comparing the persecution of the rich to the plight of Jews at Kristallnacht. We all know who that one is. Wall Street titans are saying they're sick of being beaten up. Except they're not being beaten up. And this week, a billionaire investor, Wilbur Ross, proclaimed that the 1% is being picked on for political reasons. Oh, no, boo-hoo. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time laughing at that ridiculousness. Except, once again, to put it in historical context, that's just sort of the price of being at the top of the ladder. The 1% are always going to be picked on to the extent that they kick enough down for other people to keep the picking on relatively good-natured. You survive as the 1% and you get to keep all your stuff. So, toss a few candies down our way once in a while and everything should be fine. Piss on us and we'll drag you out of your house and kill you. Just putting it in context. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just saying it's historically true. Ross's statement seemed particularly odd, the article continues, because 2 years ago I met Ross at an event that might single-handedly explain why the rest of the country still hates financial tycoons. Notice this is 2 years ago. All right, well, maybe he goes back. I'm not sure exactly what the backstory is here, whether this is the most recent dinner or he's just now telling the story of having been there 2 years ago. I'm sure largely the same. So, what was this event that single-handedly could explain why the rest of the country still hates financial tycoons? The annual black tie induction ceremony of a secret Wall Street fraternity called Kappa Beta Phi. Good evening, exalted high council, former grand swipes in waiting, fellow Wall Street Kappas from the Spring Street and Montgomery Street chapters. Is there one? I guess that. Wikipedia, you're wrong. And worthless neophytes. That's how it begins. It was January 2012, and Ross, wearing a tuxedo and two purple velvet moccasins, embroidered with the fraternity's Greek letters, was standing at the dais of the St. Regis Hotel ballroom, welcoming a crowd of 200 wealthy and famous Wall Street figures to the Kappa Beta Phi dinner. Ross, the leader or grand swipe of the fraternity, was preparing to invite 21 new members, neophytes, as the group called them, to join its exclusive ranks, looking up at him from an elegant dinner of rack of lamb and foie gras. Of course, were many of the most famous investors in the world, including executives from nearly every too-big-to-fail bank, private equity megafirm, and major hedge fund. AIG CEO Bob Benmosh was there, as were Wall Street super lawyer I just said Wall Street super liar and probably meant it. Marty Lipton and Alan Ace Greenberg, the former chairman of Bear Stearns. And those were just the returning members. Among the neophytes were hedge fund billionaire and major Obama donor Mark Lassery and Joe Reese, a high-ranking dealmaker at Credit Suisse. To see the full Kappa Beta Phi member list, we are told in the article, click here. So I recommend that you do. All told, enough wealth and power was concentrated in the St. Regis that night that if you had dropped a bomb on the roof, global finance as we know it might have ceased to exist. I'm sorry, everybody. Missed opportunity. You didn't. This was 2012. You could wait for next year. But again, the bombing would be extreme. Let us not engage in that. It's being said. That's all. Some say that could happen. During his introductory remarks, Ross spoke for several minutes about the legend of Kappa Beta Phi, how it had been started in 1929 by 4 C-plus William and Mary students, how its crest, depicting a macho right hand in a proper Savile Row suit and a Turnbull and Asser shirt sleeve, was superior to that of its namesake Phi Beta Kappa. Ross called Phi Beta Kappa's ruffled sleeve logo a tacit confession is even better, of homosexuality. I think we all probably prefer to think of it as a tacit confection of homosexuality. Hey, how about that? That sounds better. Anyway, ha, gay joke, that's a good one. And how the fraternity's motto, DUM, which is spelled D-U-M and looks more like dumb to me now, Vivemus edimus et biberimus, probably, was Latin for while we live, we eat and drink. Also itself very clever. On cue, the financiers shouted in a thundering bellow, that Latin. You yell that back, I guess. All right. The only person not saying the chant along with Ross was me, a journalist who had sneaked into the event and who was hiding out at a table in the back corner in a rented tuxedo. I'd heard whisperings about the existence of Kappa Beta Phi, whose members included both incredibly successful financiers, Michael Bloomberg, John Whitehead, Paul Tudor Jones, not John Paul Jones, but Paul Tudor Jones, John Paul Jones, dead, and incredibly unsuccessful ones, such as Lehman Brothers CEO Dick Fuld, Bear Stearns CEO Jimmy Kane, former New Jersey governor, and MF Global flameout John Corzine. It was a secret fraternity founded at the beginning of the Great Depression that functioned as a sort of one-percenters friars club. Each year, the group's dinner features comedy skits, musical acts in drag, and off-color jokes, and its group's privacy mantra is, what happens at the St. Regis stays at the St. Regis. That's actually intellectual property theft. Las Vegas, give them a call. They're huge, deep-pocket targets. Go for it. I recommend it. For 8 decades, it worked. No outsider in living memory had witnessed the entire proceedings firsthand. So congratulations, Kevin. I wanted to break the streak for several reasons. As part of my research for my book, Young Money, I'd been investigating the lives of young Wall Street bankers, the 22-year-olds toiling at the bottom of the financial sector's food chain. I knew what made those people tick, but in my career as a financial journalist, one question that proved stubbornly elusive was, what happened to Wall Streeters as they climbed the ladder to adulthood? Is that elusive? They become rich a-holes and steal everybody's money and buy multi-billion-dollar jets and co-ops and I don't know. Is that okay? Whatever. I'm sure you were looking at it more in depth than that. Whenever I'd interviewed CEOs and chairmen at big Wall Street firms, they were always too guarded, too on message, and wrapped in media relations armor to reveal anything interesting about the psychology of the ultra-wealthy. Okay, true. There you have a point. But if I could somehow see these barons in their natural environment with their defenses down, I might be able to understand the world my young subjects were stepping into. But it's private. They need to have privacy, etc. Oh, well, all I'm saying is if you're going to be too big to fail and you're going to handle all the money and run the entire economy, we might as well look at you like a pseudo-governmental organization. You're not one, but too bad. We want to know what you're about. Want me to invest my money with you? I want to know if you're a drunkard and a wacko. I'm not saying the state needs to pry into it. I'm saying somebody else can, like a reporter. Okay, so when I learned where and when Kappa Beta Phi's annual dinner was being held, I knew I needed to try to go. Getting in was shockingly easy. Right? What do they care? They didn't hire anybody for security, I'm sure. Who would waste their time at such an event? A brisk walk past the sign-in desk and I was inside cocktail hour. Immediately I saw faces I recognized from the papers. I picked up an event program and saw that there were other bold-faced names on the Kappa Beta Phi membership roll, among them then Citigroup CEO Vikram Pandit, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, Home Depot billionaire Ken Langone, there he is, Morgan Stanley bigwig Greg Fleming, and JP Morgan Chase Vice Chairman Jimmy Lee. Any way you count, this was one of the most powerful groups of business executives in the world. Since I was a good 20 years younger than any other attendee, I suspect that anyone taking note of my presence assumed I was a waiter. I hadn't counted on getting into the Kappa Beta Phi dinner, and now that I had gotten past security, I guess that you could call it, I wasn't quite sure what to do. I wanted to avoid rousing suspicion, and I knew that talking to people would get me outed in short order. So I did the next best thing. slouched against the far wall of the room and pretended to tap out emails on my phone. After cocktail hour, new inductees, all of whom were required to dress in leotards and gold-sequined skirts with costume wigs, began their variety show acts. Among the night's lowlights. Now, before I get to that, I've always been interested in the hazing aspect of these fraternities and the idea that we won't have to go into it. We can leave it to people who are better versed in feminism. But it's just interesting that when it's time to humiliate new inductees, the way you do it is make them dress as women. Now, I do see that there are some women in the ranks. What do they wear? I don't really know. And is it hilarious when they do it? I'm not really sure. All right, well, interesting question, but one that the feminists will have to delve into instead of me. All right, so among the night's lowlights, Paul Quealy, I assume that's how it's said, a private equity executive with Welsh, Carson, Anderson, and Stowe, told off-color jokes to Ted Virtue, another private equity bigwig with Mid-Ocean Partners. The jokes range from unfunny and sexist, what's the biggest difference between Hillary Clinton and a catfish? One has whiskers and stinks and the other is a fish, to unfunny and homophobic. What's the biggest difference between Barney Frank and Fenway Park? Answer, Barney Frank comes in different sized buns. Holy cow. That's interesting. So remember, everybody, I guess I'll probably stop reading the jokes because at this point they're just depressing to hear. This is a secret society founded by members known for their wit and good humor. I guess the numbers will tell you there's some gay members of Kappa Beta Phi. They're just not saying anything, I guess. All right. Wow. What an annoyance. I'm a little bit floored by the jokes. All right. So, and there's some audio that he recorded, both of the opening speech and some of the joke routines. By the way, in a room full of people with good senses of humor, and you're doing stand-up, to what's the biggest difference jokes? All right. Well, whatever, Stop reading them off of Dixie cups, guys. All right. Bill Mulrow. Oh, by the way, I don't know about the political leanings of Paul Quealy and Ted Virtue. They may very well be conservative Republicans. It's just interesting to note that, yes, there are, of course, some Democrats there, and like we noted earlier on, some Obama donors. That's just the way Wall Street is. It would be interesting to note whether what happens, for instance, if Hillary Clinton were to come around for fundraising at some point and have a chance meeting with Paul Quealy and Ted Virtue. They might be avoiding her. I don't know whether they're conservative guys, but it would be interesting if they were not. Oh, we were just kidding, and I can understand that. All right, let's see. Other lowlights include Bill Mulrow, top executive at Blackstone Group, who was later appointed chairman of the New York State Housing Finance Agency. And Emil Henry, a hedge fund manager with Tiger Infrastructure Partners. Just sounds so good. Tiger. And former assistant secretary of the Treasury. Performed a bizarre two-man comedy skit. Mulrow was dressed in raggedy tie-dye clothes to play the part of a liberal radical. And Henry was playing the part of a wealthy baron. Gee, how did Emil Henry play that part? They exchanged lines as if staging a debate between the 99% and the 1%. Bill, look at you. You're pathetic. You liberal. You need a bath. Henry shouted. My God, you callow and sensitive Republican. Don't you know what we need to do? We need to create jobs. Mulrow shot back. These guys are hilarious. David Moore, Mark Lassery, and Keith Meister, respectively, a holding company CEO, billionaire hedge fund manager, and activist investor, sang a few seconds of a finance-themed parody of YMCA before getting the hook. Activist investor. Keith Meister. What's that all about? I might even have to take a look at that one. Let's see. He's profiled here in Business Insider. Let's see. Just curious. I'm going to take a little side look here. Very interesting. Mostly it starts out with stuff that's crossed out, but here's the nut that we're looking for here. In December, Icons Icahn. I guess that's who is that? Carl Icahn, former COO and head of investor relations at the Hedge Fund Alert. Okay, well, anyway, Keith Meister, it turns out, his longtime right-hand man, Keith Meister, announced he was launching a new event-driven hedge fund seeded by George Soros's firm, Soros Fund Management. They are investing $300 million, to be exact, it says. Interesting. Okay, so, they have, I guess, their token liberals as well, but they're still financiers at heart. So that's good to know. Let's see, what else have we got? Warren Stevens, investment banking CEO, took the stage in a Confederate flag hat and sang a song about the financial crisis set to the tune of Dixie. Never mind the lyrics, I'll skip them. A few more acts followed, during which the veteran Kappas continued to gorge themselves on racks of lamb, throw petit fours at the stage, and laugh uproariously. Michael Novogratz, a former Army helicopter pilot with a shaved head and a stocky build, whose firm, Fortress Investment Group, had made him a billionaire. He was sitting next to me, drinking liberally and annotating each performance with jokes and insults. "Can you effing believe Lassery up there?" Novogratz asked me. I nodded. He added, "He just gave me a ride in his jet a month ago." Name drop, clunk, ba-doom. The neophytes, who had changed from their drag outfits into Mormon missionary costumes, oh my, broke into their musical finale, a parody version of I Believe, the hit ballad from the Book of Mormon, with customized lyrics like, "I believe that God has a plan for all of us. I believe my plan involves a 7-figure bonus." Amused, I pulled out my phone and began recording the proceedings on video. Wrong move. "Who the hell are you?" Novogratz demanded. All of a sudden, now that this is being recorded, now it's "Who the hell are you?" "Ah, can you believe that effing guy? He gave me a ride in my jet, blah, 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 I'm a billionaire." "Oh, wait a minute. This is not good. Who the hell are you?" I felt my pulse spike. I was tempted to make a run for it, but due to the ethics code of the New York Times, my then employer, I had no choice but to out myself. "I am a reporter," I said. Novogratz stood up from the table. "You're not allowed to be here," he said. True. I, too, stood and tried to excuse myself, but he grabbed my arm and wouldn't let go. "Give me that or I'll effing break it," Novogratz yelled, grabbing for my phone, which was filled with damning evidence. His eyes were bloodshot and his neck veins were bulging. The song on stage was now over, and a number of prominent Kappas had rushed over to our table. Before the situation could escalate dangerously, a bond investor and former Grand Swipe named Alexandra Liebenthal stepped in between us. Wilbur Ross quickly followed, and the two of them led me out into the lobby past a throng of Wall Street tycoons, some of whom seemed to be hyperventilating. Once we made it to the lobby, Ross and Liebenthal reassured me that what I'd just seen wasn't really a group of wealthy and powerful financiers making homophobic jokes, making light of the financial crisis, and bragging about their business conquests at Main Street's expense. No, it was just a group of friends who came together to roast each other in a benign and self-deprecating manner. Nothing to see here. I could buy it, but so what? I'd like to hear about that, too. But the extent of their worry wasn't made clear until Ross offered himself up as a source for future stories in exchange for my cooperation. "I'll pick up the phone anytime, get you any help you need," he said. "Yeah, the people in this group could be very helpful," Liebenthal chimed in, "if you could just keep their privacy in mind." I wasn't going to be bribed off my story, but I understood their panic. Here, after all, was a group that included many of the executives whose firms had collectively wrecked the global economy in 2008 and 2009, and they were laughing off the entire disaster in private as if it were a long-forgotten lark. Or worse, sing about it. One of the last skits of the night was a self-congratulatory parody of ABBA's Dancing Queen called Bailout King. That is clever. See, King, Queen. Get it? Dancing, 2 syllables. Bailout, 2 syllables. These were activities that amounted to a gigantic middle finger to Main Street, and that, if made public, could end careers and damage very public reputations. Apparently it has not, to date. But yes, a helpful reminder that not only had they wrecked the global economy in 2008 and 2009, they were all eating and drinking and inducting themselves into an honor society based on how much money they have, which they only still had because we bailed them out. These folks are, generally speaking, still rich because us. Because you and me. Because too big to fail. Just pointing that out. Oh, but we're the ones that suck and are leeches, by the way. After several more minutes trying to do damage control, Ross and Leventhal escorted me out of the St. Regis. As I walked through the streets of Midtown in my ill-fitting tuxedo, I thought about the implications of what I'd just seen. I'm thinking about the implications of what he had just been offered. Yes, what he saw was important. Just as important, I think, is that they basically said to him, we'll give you tips, and you'll become a more successful financial reporter if you just don't tell this story. Unfortunately, I guess they ran into a guy who said, well, I'm not really looking to be a financial reporter, just a reporter. So I'll tell the story, although it's interesting. Did this story get published elsewhere closer in time to when it happened, or is this the first time it's been reported? All right. Well, if I ever meet Kevin, I'll ask him. Maybe he's on Twitter. Someone else ask him. All right, so first and most obvious conclusion was that the upper ranks of finance are composed of people who have completely divorced themselves from reality. No self-aware and socially conscious Wall Street executive would have agreed to be part of a group whose tacit mission was to make light of the financial sector's foibles, not when those foibles had resulted in real harm to millions of people in the form of foreclosures, wrecked 401ks, and a devastating unemployment crisis. I beg to differ. I don't think that they were particularly moved by that, but okay. The second thing I realized was that Kappa Beta Phi was in large part a fear-based organization. Here were executives who had strong ideas about politics, society, and the work of their colleagues, but who could never have the courage to voice those opinions in a public setting. Their cowardice had reduced them to sniping at their perceived enemies in the form of satirical songs and sketches among only those people who had been handpicked to share their view of the world. And the idea of a reporter making those views public had caused them to throw a mass temper tantrum. That's also interesting, too. They would never think to make those things public because money. They could not stay, they think, rich because they would lose the jobs that make them rich. And by the way, as it turns out, it's not their gigantic brain that makes them rich. It's the job that they occupy. By virtue of the fact that no one knows publicly that I am a gigantic homophobic jerk, people will entrust me with their money, from which I will skim the profits that make me a billionaire. I said I've been thinking a lot about the Wall Street types over the last couple of days. This is the amount of sympathy that I came up with for them. I am constantly, I always think about, for instance, unionized workers or even non-unionized workers who are in the job of producing the products that have made the owners of their companies extraordinarily wealthy, and saying, why is it that they don't get a share in the spoils? We have discussed in the past the transition in the business and finance community away from recognizing stakeholders in favor of recognizing shareholders. They increase shareholder value, not stakeholder value, because the labor that goes into producing the stuff has a stake in it too. What they don't own are shares, coupons that you buy with capital, cash. They contribute labor, which is not capital. It's different from capital. And in their view, I guess somehow the opposite and enemy of capital. And they just prefer capital over labor. And so whatever. Okay, they love their money, essentially. So what does this, where does this get us? We're constantly advocating that the people who produce these goods should be recognized and compensated justly as stakeholders and not excluded by narrowing the circle to just shareholders. But think for a moment about how much we hate to hear stories about, particularly of new young people working for Wall Street and knocking themselves out and getting gigantic bonuses and doing nothing but living for the money. Much worse, of course, once you've climbed the ladder. I mean, it's interesting. It's a little bit like a lot of professions. You knock yourself out as a newbie to prove your mettle, and then it's like hazing. Once you've done that, and then you kind of move up to the next step on the ladder, and higher and higher. The higher you get, the more you get to skim from other people who are really the ones knocking themselves out. But you give yourself big compensation, and you justify the big compensation by saying, my genius brain is making all these little people work for me. And besides which, even if it's not that, everyone else will get their turn too, so long as they play the game. And I got to thinking, well, I'm wondering, people who get these big giant bonuses, maybe they're making the same claim that the workers are making. It's just that the workers lose on their claim and the financiers win on their claim. Essentially, whether newbies to the business, the kids just out of college who are knocking themselves out working 100 hours a week, or one level up from them, or middle managers, or even up at the top of the chain, they justify their giant bonuses by saying, well, what is my product? The answer, unfortunately, is my product is nothing, but that's not the entire answer. Of course, they produce a lot of money and a lot of wealth. I mean, we keep saying that they don't really do anything, they don't really make anything, and that's true. But are their clients not wealthy? They are, right? Sometimes they lose money, it's true, and it's kind of infuriating that those guys get their commissions whether they make money or lose money, but, the commissions only stay with them if they make money long term, presumably. So they are producing something. They are making their clients rich or keeping them rich or whatever. They're doing whatever it is they're doing. They're keeping their clients happy enough to keep paying them these commissions. Now, you could argue that the commissions are too big or that they add up to too much, and they do. But at some level, I guess I'm saying that the workers on Wall Street, the ones who are entitled to a cut of the money anyway, not the secretaries, they're dumb. We hate them. They're like the nails ladies that attended the fundraiser for Mitt Romney out there on Long Island, or didn't attend it. They're the ones that were being talked about by the attendees. Those guys don't get a cut of anything. But the financial geniuses who are invested in the game, that I will knock myself out 100 hours a week in exchange for a couple of years later, it's like multi-level marketing. There'll be newbies in here, and I'll supervise 5 of them, and they'll all kick up to me. And I'll kick up to an underboss, and the underboss will kick up to a capo, and that goes like that. Same thing, right? But here's the way I was thinking of it is, okay, well, those guys are knocking themselves out. They are making their clients rich. They are making their firms rich. Is it terrible that they get a gigantic bonus, sometimes even a 7-figure bonus? It's terrible, by comparison to the rest of the world where everybody gets screwed. But, maybe it's just that the Wall Street Union works better than others. And it might have something to do with the fact that we just favor, we've gotten ourselves to a place in this country where we favor, by a long shot, by a mile and a half, capital over labor. And here these guys labor in the creation of capital. So if you create it, you want a slice of it. Somehow, interestingly, stakeholders in financial companies get paid, and shareholders too, but stakeholders get a bigger chunk in when your industry is finance than they do when your industry is anything else. Anybody else is just a worker bee, and you get what you get, and besides which, screw you and I'm stealing your pension. But if you're in finance, you're in the club. You get to be a stakeholder, and the stakeholders get paid. I think that's a very interesting difference. And I don't know, if you're trying to create some sympathy, I remember I'm bending over backwards to create some sympathy as a thought experiment, maybe nothing more. I'm perfectly willing to acknowledge that this might be completely stupid and I should abandon it right away. But there's an argument to be made that they are helping amass wealth for their organization, even if they're screwing their clients. If they can continue to screw them, then that's a skill in itself. But if a large, if the company accumulates a gigantic pot of money, maybe it's a good thing that they pass it all out to the underlings. It's just that there's only a certain class of underlings that gets it. And so it doesn't really reach the level where it's a redeeming quality. Bruce McFarling, listening live, says, but do they produce the money or do they just redirect it? Yes, they do redirect it. The job, I should finish reading your comment first, probably. And the money is only wealth because of the real stuff it can buy. 2 good points. Let me say I agree and say this. Okay, do they produce the money or do they just redirect it? Let's just say they redirect it. That's fine. The job of being in finance these days is how can we redirect money to ourselves? The business model is simple enough. And at the most basic level, it's completely ridiculous and unfair, but it's accepted because of the amounts of cash that are floating around. And I don't know, one of the things that we have somehow managed to train the extraordinarily wealthy to accept is enormous amounts of money being skimmed as commission. So long as bigger and more enormous bundles of money are being delivered as dividends and earnings, or in some cases, there's just enough left in the pot that the rich people can continue to ignore what the hell their life is about and just live, drink their champagne, and there's still money in the trust fund. They don't really care what's going to commissions. And I guess that's an interesting market effect, right? Presumably an efficient market theorist would say, those people are going to watch their money like hawks because why not? And they'll pull out of any situation where they're not actually making money. Whereas the truth in some cases is it's Arthur on the other end. As long as there's enough money for champagne, he doesn't give a crap what's happening to his money. Because drunk, because good time Charlie, because what does he care? Anyway, so yeah, do they produce the money? No, they don't. What they produce is they oil the cogs in the machinery with which the financial companies remove cash from the hands of their clients. Everybody crosses their fingers and hopes that they can give enough back to their clients to keep them as clients, but only insofar as it would be bad for your bottom line, your personal bottom line, if clients left you with a smaller pool to skim from. It seems to me the whole idea here is once you've convinced people that they have to pay you commission, win or lose, and that's okay among the rich really need to get an attitude about their riches in some cases, right? They have an attitude about other people's riches or whatever capital other people might be able to get a hold of. I want to make sure you get the smallest piece possible so that the biggest piece possible is available for me. But for some reason, they don't get that stingy with commissions. And I guess that's still because financial brokers and such are still the gatekeepers to riches. If you lead an investor revolt that results in lowering commissions, you're on the outs. They're going to punish you. So it's not that they produce money, it's that they produce the system for redirecting it. And it's efficient enough that it keeps their bosses happy and little intrusive enough into the lives of probably the mostly ignorant and not looking very closely wealthy that they don't care that they're getting screwed either. Or they don't care that they're getting screwed because there's just enough to go around, which is an amazing thing in itself, right? When it comes to that, well, I got enough that I don't have to worry about losing XYZ in commissions. But call those commissions taxes, and what? How 1 penny out of my pocket, and I'll have you flogged. It is an interesting phenomenon. And yes, the money is only wealth because of the real stuff it can buy. Yeah, well, we're all stuck in that illusion. And we all have a stake in maintaining it, I guess, so long as we realize how much of our compensation we have been willing to take in cash. If we declare that not worth anything, then we're all in trouble. Anyway, I guess I probably ought to continue with the article because there's more. All right, so Kevin writes also that the last thought he had after the second one about watching people throw a mass temper tantrum, the saddest, he thinks, was that many of these self-righteous Kappa Beta Phi members had surely been first-year bankers once. And in the 20, 30, or 40 years since, something fundamental about them had changed. Their pursuit of money and power had removed them from the larger world to the sad extent that now, in the primes of their careers, the only people with whom they could truly be themselves were a handful of other prominent financiers. Maybe true of almost every profession, but it's certainly true here. Perhaps I realize this social isolation is why, despite extraordinary evidence to the contrary, 1%ers like Ross keep saying how badly persecuted they are. When you're a member of the fraternity of money, it can be hard to see past the foie gras into the real world. And guess what? We have reached the end of the article, and so fantastic. I've completed it. That's pretty wall-to-wall, Robert, at least up to now. But I thought an important part of the general public progressive narrative, and one we ought to share in, and it did give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about some additional stuff too. We don't just read the articles here. We listen to me talk about reading the articles. We really have to, maybe the goal for the next year of the show is going to have to be to find some way to make it a little bit more interactive. And to that end, also my wife's been bothering me about this. It might be time at some point to set up a little web page of our own and say, you know what, maybe we need to do a little support gathering and round up some money. And maybe we need to somehow professionalize the operation here and take another look at, maybe if we paid for systems that would be easier to use, then we could start taking some phone calls in. I don't know if we're ever really going to get around to getting a producer because, honestly, I like doing this show from home. If there's a way I can have somebody on hand remotely to push buttons and make sure everything works, that's fine. But the idea of saying, yeah, come on in while I eat breakfast and get the kids out the door, I don't know that I would subject anybody to that, and I don't know what I would have to pay to get somebody to put up with that. But at any rate, yes, I guess we're coming up nearly this summer. I guess we'll get around to our second year of this format of Daily Kos Radio, and I think doing it on spec for 2 years is pretty good. Time to get over the natural reluctance to ask people to pitch in if they enjoy the show a little bit. We don't have to make it. I'm still against the subscription model just because it just feels anti-bloggy somehow. But I don't know. I'll reconcile it if we put up a donations page and then either nothing comes in or people say, I'd rather subscribe. I don't know. I don't think I want to lock out new users, though. I don't want people to be able to pick up the show for free. Get them hooked like crack. That's what I say. All right. Other stories that are floating around. There are several. One I just want to revisit from yesterday. I mentioned the situation down in Arkansas, since everything was happening in Arkansas, the open carry guys, etc. But I mentioned the 15-year-old girl who had been shot and killed for egging somebody's car. And I got some interesting comments about that one, and I missed them at the time. But during the show, from Justice, who, as you know, is the closest thing we have to a remote producer who pushes buttons and makes things work, but who I pay nothing, so that's sad. So send him some money. How about that? Everybody send Netroots Radio some money, and then he'll get some of that, and it'll pay for some of the equipment that actually makes this thing work. We'll start with that, and then after that's paid for, then maybe we'll raise some money here too. Anyway, here's the comments that he made. The girl who was killed in this case, the 15-year-old girl. Now, again, I'll set the table for those of you who might have missed the show yesterday or missed the story. We're talking about a 15-year-old girl in Little Rock, Arkansas, who was pranking a friend, and that's not clear from the story. What happens in the story that I read was they were pranking some guy. They were egging his car and mayonnaising his car, which is a new one on me. But okay, whatever's gross and you have on hand. Eggs, mayonnaise, and leaves. That one I never heard of either. But maybe in Arkansas they think trees are gross. That's possible. It's a different culture. Anyway, I also made mention of the fact that maybe there was some cultural aspect to this that we were missing, even though the initial suspicion of, maybe there's a racial element, didn't turn out to be true. And I'm kind of glad about that so we can focus on the other issues. But there is, in fact, a hidden cultural issue. It's not a racial issue. It's something different. The 15-year-old who was shot, remember, she's involved in egging and mayonnaising somebody's car. Out comes the guy with the shotgun because something weird is happening outside to his car, which is a valuable asset. He wants to protect it. He came out with a gun, and I thought I read it was a shotgun, but maybe it's turning out now that it's a handgun. I don't know that it makes that much difference. Anyway, the kids, seeing somebody come out, take off. Probably don't even notice. I don't know whether they noticed he had a gun or not. The point was the owner came out, and that was reason to pile in the car and run away. The owner, of course, does come out with a gun, and seeing the kids run away is angered both by the egging of the car. It would be a stretch to call it vandalism, but it is vandalism. It doesn't do any permanent damage as far as I know. I don't know what mayonnaise does to the finish of a car. Don't want to find out. But whatever. Okay, you're mad about this. Here's the thing. They're running away. And generally speaking, standard practice, common law practice, somebody running away from really minimal property damage isn't to be shot at because you could kill them, and it's not an executable offense to put mayonnaise on someone's car. You know, Dijonnaise, fine, go for it. Fire away. Mayonnaise, wasabi mayonnaise, I'm a purist when it comes to mayonnaise. Miracle Whip, which I actually can tolerate, but a lot of people think is disgusting. Maybe in some states you're going to shoot. But this is Arkansas. You can't shoot somebody for Miracle Whip. I'm positive of that. Anyway, he, of course, basically is of the, it seems to me, if I have to guess at what's going through his mind, it's, oh, you think you're going to run away? You think you can just egg my car and leave, and because you're leaving and the law says I'm not allowed to kill you, then I'm not going to kill you? Well, watch this. And of course, he didn't mean to kill them. He just meant to scare them. You mayonnaised my car. I'll show you. I'm going to one-up you. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Add mustard, mayo, and mustard on your car? No, I'm going to put bullet holes in your car. But don't worry, I just want to scare you. Except what ends up happening very often on the other side of bullet holes is you find out that the holes are in something important, like the brain of a 15-year-old girl. And in this case, as it turns out, a 15-year-old cheerleader. Now, why is it interesting that a cheerleader is killed? Is it because that's Americana and we're more angry about killing cheerleaders than chess club members? No, that's not the point I wanted to get at. What Justice was telling me was this. We don't know if this is the case here necessarily, but I thought this was some interesting cultural possible insight into this situation, but certainly tells us something that he knows to be a fact about where he grew up. All right, so the 15-year-old girl's a cheerleader. They're pranking, he says. I don't know that I read this in the report, but there's now dozens and dozens and dozens of articles on this. I would not be surprised at all to have missed this fact, and I would be very surprised if Justice were just making stuff up. But here's what we got. The 15-year-old girl who was killed was a cheerleader, and they were pranking the son's car. I could see why in the first round of reporting, it's parked in the guy's driveway. He's the homeowner. We assume it's his car. What if it is, in fact, the son's car? And why were they pranking the son's car? It is said here that it is in friendly retaliation to a prank a few weeks earlier. So wouldn't that change the situation if the son, whose car it was, had earlier pranked someone else, and in friendly retaliation for the prank, remember, they didn't key his car, they didn't slash his tires, they didn't smash his windshield, they didn't put bullet holes in it, even though the car was empty, and it would have been presumably a little bit safer to put bullet holes in an empty car than a full one. And remember, there were 7 kids piled into the car that was running away. The idea that you could shoot up the car and have it come out just fine is a little bit dumb. But Justice says, when he played football in high school, it was an honor. All right, we'll put that in bunny ears quotes. An honor for the cheerleaders to toilet paper a player's house. And they always came back to clean up. The first time it happened, I, Justice said, had to explain to my dad it wasn't vandalism. He wanted to call the cops. So, pretty interesting. What about that? I think that's a great point. And he says, as the cheerleader thing struck home, His dad is a fairly by-the-book, old-school liberal, and he couldn't wrap his head around how TPing a house was an honor and not vandalism. He was very close to calling the cops. Now, with guns so prevalent, of course, cop calling is way down the list. So is that what happened here? Did the son prank somebody else, and when they came for their friendly pranking revenge, was the son there? I don't know. Was the son angry? Is it ridiculous? Is the son pranking other people and then not be, able to dish it out but not take it? Or was he like, Dad, no? Or was he even there? Does Dad have any understanding of it? Well, what he doesn't have any understanding is you can't shoot people for mayonnaise as much as you might want to, particularly if it's crappy mayonnaise. Now, some people have egg allergies, right? Or maybe they put peanuts on there. Peanuts, I'm deathly allergic to peanuts. How dare you? I feared for my life, so I shot at these people rather than go back inside and get away from the peanuts. No, there's really no excuse. I can't come up with one. And boy, will that guy feel terrible if he finds out that his son had been out pranking people in similar fashion and nobody shot at his son, but whatever. All right, I thought that was an interesting point I wanted to add into the mix just to throw in there because everybody's talking about that story too. Another story others are talking about that doesn't have any guns in it as far as I know, but is much passed around and belongs in our discourse is the piece written by labor reporter Mike Elk, who finds himself, as always, a controversial figure in the labor world. And it largely comes down to this. He is very often critical of especially top leadership of big institutional unions. And though he is sympathetic to the union and labor cause in general, finds very often that his criticism of labor union leadership puts him on the outs with a lot of people. And he also occupies an interesting and unique position in the labor reporting world, such that there are many others who I believe have tremendous credibility in the labor world who find him just a little hyperbolic and annoying, and he likes to put himself in the center of controversy. Probably all true. And yet, I do think he produces some interesting reporting and perspective, and clearly there's got to be some kind of postmortem done on this UAW defeat to this point at the Tennessee Volkswagen plant that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago. And so here's his postmortem. Workers and organizers cite outside interference, management collusion, union missteps, two-tier agreements, and Neil Young. This under the headline, After Historic UAW Defeat at Tennessee Volkswagen Plant, Theories Abound. And they always do. It's just a theory that's out there that theories will abound. I am excited, auto worker Justin King told me as he put on his cowboy boots to get ready for the victory party planned for late Friday night. At approximately 10 p.m., the United Auto Workers Union and Volkswagen would announce the results of a 3-day union election at the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee. King had reason to be excited. For nearly 3 years, he had campaigned to get the union into his plant. As one of the leaders of the drive, his sense was that the UAW had the support of a majority of the plant's 1,500-plus hourly workers. It's actually 1,550 hourly workers. Unlike in most union drives, organizers didn't have to worry about the company threatening workers' jobs because Volkswagen had agreed to remain neutral in the process. Hallelujah. So King felt cautiously optimistic that the support would hold. But Justin King never got to enjoy his victory party. An hour after we spoke, retired Circuit Court Judge Samuel H. Payne announced to a room full of reporters assembled in a Volkswagen training facility that the UAW had lost the campaign, with 626 workers voting in favor of the union and 712 voting against. To the labor reporters who had seen many union election results, it was jaw-dropping news. How could a union lose an unopposed campaign? That is a good question. Volkswagen signed a 22-page neutrality agreement pledging not to interfere in the union election at the Chattanooga plant. The company even let the union onto the shop floor, in early February to give a presentation on the merits of organizing. It is impossible to say why, each of those 712 workers voted against the union and what the UAW could have done differently to win them over one by one. However, in these Times interviews, and that's the outlet Mike is publishing in here, in these Times interviews with both pro-union and anti-union workers, as well as low-level Volkswagen supervisors, top UAW officials, and community activists, point to a confluence of factors including outside interference by GOP politicians and unsanctioned anti-union activity by low-level supervisors. Some question, too, whether missteps by the UAW and concerns about its prior bargaining agreements played a role. The UAW was quick to blame the loss on public anti-union threats by right-wing politicians. We heard about those. Immediately following the election results, UAW President Bob King informed reporters, "We are obviously deeply disappointed, but we're also outraged by the outside interference in this election. Never before in this country have we seen a U.S. senator, a governor, and a leader of the legislature threaten the company with incentives and threaten workers with a loss of product. That's outrageous." I don't know if it's the first time in history, but it's one pretty crappy time in history at the very least. It really was rather outrageous. On Monday, 2 days before the election began, Republican State Senate Speaker Pro Tem Bo Watson and Republican House Majority Leader Gerald McCormick suggested that Volkswagen might not receive future state subsidies if the plant unionized. And that's a position I categorized this way by saying, bring jobs to our state. Bring jobs to Tennessee, Volkswagen, and we'll give you a tax break. But if you let those jobs get secure and pay too well and allow workers any dignity, we'll kick your asses right out of Tennessee. Then on Wednesday, U.S. Senator Bob Corker, Republican of Tennessee, former mayor of Chattanooga, who had pledged the previous week not to comment publicly about the ongoing election, waded back into the debate to declare, "I've had conversations today." Oh my goodness, he had conversations, everybody. "And based on those, I am assured that should the workers vote against the UAW, Volkswagen will announce in the coming weeks that it will manufacture its new midsize SUV here in Chattanooga." When Volkswagen Chattanooga chairman and CEO Frank Fisher refuted Corker, saying the union election would have no effect on the SUV decision, Corker doubled down. "Believe me. Don't believe anything else. Believe me, not the CEO. The decisions regarding the Volkswagen expansion are not being made by anyone in management at the Chattanooga plant. And we are also very aware Frank Fisher is having to use old talking points when he responds to press inquiries." Corker said in a statement on Thursday, "After all these years and my involvement with Volkswagen, I would not have made the statement I made yesterday without being confident it was true and factual." So you can take that for what it's worth. I have a feeling he might make statements without being confident that they were true and factual. At a press conference following the vote announcement, UAW Secretary-Treasurer Dennis Williams echoed Union President Bob King in blaming the loss of support for the union on the Republican politician's statements. "When the governor made his comments, we saw some movement at that time," said Williams. "When Senator Corker said he was not going to be involved and then he came back from Washington, D.C., we had a feeling there was something happening. 43 votes was the difference, so it's very disturbing when this happens in the United States of America, when a company and a union come together and have a fair election process." The UAW also announced shortly after the election that it was exploring legal options and might petition the National Labor Relations Board to order a new election because of the threats issued by Corker, the governor, and the leaders of the Tennessee State House and Senate. However, threats of workers losing their jobs are routine during union elections, though they usually come from management, not outside forces, and unions still often prevail. Both pro-union workers and anti-union activists said other factors played key roles in derailing the union drive. While the neutrality agreement forbade Volkswagen from campaigning against the drive, plant worker and union activist Byron Spencer says that low-level supervisors and salaried employees who were not eligible for the union ignored the directive and actively opposed the drive. He also reports seeing multiple low-level supervisors and salaried employees at the plant wearing "Vote No" t-shirts in the days leading up to the union election. Pro-UAW worker Wayne Clyott says there is no doubt in his mind that the opposition by salaried employees hurt the campaign. The salaried people from Pilot Hall, the prestigious research and development center at the plant, stood out front every day this past week with anti-UAW shirts on, and I truly believe they swayed the votes their way, says Clyott. Indeed, in these times interviewed one salaried employee, Mary Fiorello, who actively participated in the No to UAW committee, an anti-union effort organized by a group of hourly workers who were eligible for the union. You have to look at from the point of view of a salaried support person, says Fiorello. My job here is to help them do their job. I don't get paid if they don't make cars, and the union makes it all that harder. This is direct quote. I don't know. If they want to ask me for help on something and it's a union facility, they can't even come up and ask me for help. And it makes it so much tougher for us here to be a team. And we are a team, and it's upsetting when a group comes down from Detroit, that's the crux of the problem, and tells us how we should be. The No to UAW campaign used the very neutrality agreement that the UAW signed to argue that the union was making corrupt deals with management without worker input. The anti-union campaign argued that the neutrality agreement seemed to indicate that UAW would not bargain for wages above what was offered by Volkswagen's competitors in the United States. UAW and Volkswagen agreed to maintaining and, where possible, enhancing the cost advantages and other competitive advantages that Volkswagen enjoys relative to its competitors in the United States and North America. So what's wrong with this, I wonder? We got people to realize they had already negotiated a deal behind their backs. Workers didn't get to have a say-so. Hourly plant worker Mike Jarvis of No to UAW told reporters outside of the plant last night. Now that's interesting. So as the claim here then that the anti-union workers opposed unionization from the left, that they opposed organizing under the UAW umbrella because the UAW had said that they were not going to press, at least not immediately, for an increase in wages for the workers that they organized. I mean, that's a possibility that they did that. I mean, the neutrality agreement, I think, is open to examination. But how interesting. Are they serious or are they concern trolling? My guess is that they're concern trolling and that they're basically saying they're opposing unionization probably from the Rush Limbaugh right, blue-collar Rush Limbaugh right, and saying, I heard unions suck and they're full of thugs and they're going to steal all our money in the form of dues. And if you pro-union workers don't believe that, then believe this. The union is already screwing you because they have a quote-unquote secret deal with management to make sure that you don't get a raise out of this. And how interesting is that? Because here in this neutrality agreement, probably why would the UAW agree to something like that? Why would they agree that they wouldn't be pressing for an increase in wages? Yeah, it's interesting because I'm guessing, they made the concession that, well, let's take that issue off the table. Let's not make the unionization vote hinge on whether or not the anti-union forces can convince Southern conservative workers at this plant that they will lose their jobs because the union will force wages at Volkswagen up above that point at which there's any relative advantage to keeping the plant in Chattanooga, and they'll just close it and move it to Mexico where they can pay workers less. Let's take that off the table and say there will be no immediate pressure for higher wages. Clearly, the workers here are happy enough that they're staying here, and they don't necessarily immediately want to push for a change in that equilibrium. They're fine with wages where they are so long as the jobs stay where they are. We simply want to talk about the ability to have input on other issues from a worker's perspective. So maybe that's the deal they thought they were cutting. Brilliant, devious, a lie, and wrong, though, for the anti-union forces among the workforce to then say, aha, see, they've already written off a wage hike for you in secret. So therefore, they will always screw you on everything. Because are you getting more money out of this? No. Well, then what's a union for? Well, there's a million other things a union is for. But if they cut a secret deal to cut you out of the one thing most people know unions are for, what else have they screwed you out of? I don't know. That's a good point. I listened to Rush Limbaugh too, but I thought I would help things out for myself at the job if we were unionized. Because as much as I understand the complaints about unions, I also understand the benefits of unionization. And I thought I'd give it a shot, particularly if the company says publicly, nah, we're not going to close this place if you unionize. No, we actually encourage you to unionize. Good, so it's safe, right? And then they hear this stuff. Interesting. I mean, that's really basically just concern trolling. And it's misconstrued. Yeah, they death paneled the union vote. This agreement has death panels in it. No, it doesn't. Too bad. The death panel, the cat's out of the bag. People heard death panel and now they're pissed. Very interesting. Okay. Well, let's see. So the article continues. Fiorello also cited the UAW's past concessions in bargaining with other automakers as an example of why she opposed the union. In a series of contract negotiations in the late 1990s and 2000s, the UAW agreed to a two-tier wage system at Volkswagen's competitors among the big three automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. Two-tier agreements specify that new hires will earn significantly less than existing workers. Fiorello notes that currently, new non-union assembly line workers at Volkswagen start at $14.50 an hour, which, with cost of living differences between Tennessee and the Midwest factored in, is arguably slightly higher than the just under $16 an hour starting pay under the UAW two-tier contracts at the Big Three. See, that's kind of the problem. Our guys are being paid more than union workers at the Big Three, says Fiorello. What the UAW is offering, we can already do without them, says hourly worker Mike Burton, who created the website for the No to UAW campaign. We were only given one choice of a union. When you are only given one choice, it's BS. It would be nice if we had a union that came in here and forthright and said, here's what we can offer. I am not anti-union. I am anti-UAW, Burton continues. There are great unions out there, and we just weren't offered any of them. Interesting, and I wonder whether that would hold up to further examination. But I don't know. Now, as Mike, we'll see what the conclusion of the article is. If Mike is arguing that they are anti-UAW from the left, that should become obvious by the end of the piece. We'll see whether that's the case. Burton's arguments, though, seem to mirror that of Senator Bob Corker, who routinely made such statements as, it's not about union or anti-union, it's about the way the UAW conducts business. And now it's beginning to sound like BS to me, too. When asked in these times if the UAW's history of two-tier contracts hurt the union's ability to win over skeptical workers, UAW President Bob King responded, I don't know. I am not going to speculate because I wasn't in the plant. Questioned by Lydia DePillis of the Washington Post about why the union had agreed to cost containment measures as part of the collective bargaining agreement, King responded, our philosophy is we want to work in partnership with companies to succeed. Nobody has more at stake in the long-term success of the company than the workers on the shop floor, both blue-collar and white-collar. With every company that we work with, we're concerned about competitiveness. And isn't that interesting? So the right has been concern trolling against unions for years by saying they are basically anti-competitive in nature and there's no way to deal with them if you are in management or actually want to turn a profit. The unions say, let us take that concern off the table for you. And the right-wing folks then turn around and say, see, unions are no good. They secretly negotiate away your ability to be anti-competitive or something like that. And therefore, they suck and they're not really... That's a very brilliant plan. And I don't know. I was going to say I can't believe it works, but I guess I can believe it. I'm watching it work right now. Interesting. All right. Well, like I say, death paneled it. Some labor observers have questioned whether provisions in the neutrality agreement may also have hampered the UAW's ability to make its case. Though neutrality agreements often help avoid vociferous employer opposition, unions also have to give up powerful organizing or negotiating tools, says Moshe Marvet, a labor lawyer and fellow at the Century Foundation. In the case of the Chattanooga drive, the neutrality agreement barred the UAW from making negative comments about Volkswagen. It also specifically prevented the UAW from holding one-on-one meetings with workers at their homes, except at the workers' express request. House visits are a common tactic used by union organizers to build trust with workers and answer questions about individual needs and concerns. One longtime labor organizer, Peter Hognes, was so shocked that the UAW didn't do house visits that he sent me a message today to ask me if it was true. When asked by In These Times if the inability to make house visits hurt the union drive, UAW Secretary-Treasurer Dennis Williams simply responded, no. Also, pro-union community activists who spoke within These Times on condition of anonymity out of fear of hurting their relationships with the UAW spoke about difficulties in getting the UAW to help them engage the broader Chattanooga community. Many activists I spoke with during my 2 trips to Chattanooga said that when they saw the UAW being continually blasted on local talk radio, newspapers, and billboards, they wanted to get involved to help build community support. However, they say that the UAW was lukewarm in partnering with them. Indeed, when I attended a forum in December organized by Chattanooga for Workers, a community group designed to build local support for the organizing drive, more than 150 community activists attended, many from different area unions, but I encountered only 3 UAW members. Community activists said they had a hard time finding ways to coordinate solidarity efforts with the UAW, whose campaign they saw as insular rather than community-based. There's no way to win in the South without everyone that supports you fighting with you, said one Chattanooga community organizer who preferred to remain anonymous, because the South is one giant anti-union campaign. So, this is interesting. And what am I beginning to see here? What I think I'm seeing here is Mike Elk is criticizing the UAW campaign from the left. He thinks they ought not, I'm guessing, if I understand him correctly, I'm not guessing, I'm surmising from the writing and knowing a little bit about Mike Elk and where he's usually coming from, is what's happening here a strange confluence, and is this what's making others who I respect in the labor movement and with good, solid labor history so frustrated with Mike? Is Mike, it seems, is criticizing from the left. You ought not to have signed this neutrality agreement that barred you from engaging in the tactics that are 1, honest, 2, open, 3, engage the community, 4, engage the workers, and 5, available to you fully under standard labor relations law, but which you gave up in an attempt to work more closely with the company and management, in exchange for their neutrality. You would, it seems like a fair agreement on its face. In isolation, you say, well, the company won't oppose the unionization drive, and we just ask that you don't beat us up. If we decide to stay neutral, don't you not stay neutral. Don't you say bad things about Volkswagen. And I guess among those things is Volkswagen pays you crap. You need more money. That might also not be true. And so maybe that's why they didn't say it. But they opted for whatever reason. That would be among the things that would be, I guess, perceived as criticizing the company and written out of possibility by the neutrality agreement. But what's interesting here is I think that I am also very clearly seeing that there are right-wing critics of the union and unions in general who are using the concern trolling angle. And where on one hand you got Mike Elk and folks on the left saying, you guys gave up too much in order to try to reach a negotiated settlement in the middle here, which is usually the kind of thing that you're supposed to be encouraging people to do, right? And yet, on the right, No one is appeased by this. So there's an interesting lesson in here. On the one hand, I think, okay, well, I think in isolation the neutrality agreement makes a certain amount of sense. We ought to try that. Let's remove the issue. But here's where you run into a problem. You think that you're having a honest exchange, an intellectually honest exchange. We won't be unduly critical or even critical at all of the company if the company won't be critical of us. Stay neutral, we'll stay neutral. But what do you give up in that neutrality? Some traditional organizing tactics that are legitimately criticizable from the left. You didn't engage the community. You didn't engage these workers. You didn't do home visits. You didn't tell them what UAW really could do for them. You didn't counter that from the other side. But since it wasn't coming from the company, the agreement barred them from doing it, right? So at the same time, you turn that on its head, and from the right, you say, well, look, as a concerned troll, I tell you, the UAW is no good for you or for me or for any of us. Look what they're giving up. If they're willing to sign away these legitimate organizing tools, how are they ever going to get you anything? This is some really amazing double dealing here. And I'm sure this is what contributes to frustration among other solid pro-union activists with guys like Mike Elk who say, now wait a second, you're taking Republican concern trolling and giving it legitimacy on the left. But doesn't it, isn't it a legitimate question to ask, why did you give up this stuff? Why say you weren't going to do home visits? Is the company really that concerned about home visits? And if they are, how neutral are they really? I guess it's worth asking. So this is a tough one for me. All right. Well, at any rate, let's finish up with this article because we're finishing up with the show. Still, at the end of the day, unions make missteps in union elections all the time and often face opposition from management, and the workers still sometimes win. Indeed, the NLRB reports that unions won 60% of elections conducted in fiscal year 2013. So why didn't the UAW win in Chattanooga? We thought we had the numbers we needed, said Client. We could analyze for days and not really know for sure, but I do think the last-minute blitz of negative campaigning from our politicians turned some votes to no. What is going on with these people? Leonard Skinner may not have liked the song written by Neil Young, Southern Man, but Neil had a point. In the 1974 song, Sweet Home Alabama. We don't have to explain this. I'm sorry, but that's what it says in the article. Ronnie Van Zant of Leonard Skinner sings, well, I hope Neil Young will remember a Southern man, don't need him around anyhow. The lyric is a reference to Canadian singer Neil Young's Southern Man, which criticized Southerners for being opposed to social change. But for one Southern man, progress still feels achievable. I'm a stubborn man, said Client. Some are talking about quitting. I will be walking into the plant on Monday with my head held high and preaching the message of solidarity. And some full disclosure down at the bottom of the article here. The author's mother, Mike Elk's mom, worked on an auto assembly line at a VW plant in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania until it closed in 1988 and was a member of the UAW. UAW is a website sponsor of In These Times. Sponsors have no role in editorial content. Well, okay, that is really interesting and exposes some interesting fault lines here. On the one hand, why didn't you use these tools? On the other hand, you thought you were making a deal. And I guess that's really where things break down. It's difficult to know. I'd like to think that Volkswagen bargained in relatively good faith here, given that their workers are unionized everywhere else in the world that they work, with the exception of China. But then again, why are they working in China? But okay, it's a company and they got to make some money, and right, we'll forgive them some sins. But all around the world, they've got plants out, in a lot of countries. They're all unionized, except for the ones in China and the United States, because freedom. And they sought to change that in the United States and gave what appeared to be the best, most open shot at it to the UAW, and it just didn't work out. So I guess one question is, did Volkswagen, this is entirely possible, did Volkswagen engage in double dealing? Did they say, yes, let us look like good guys and sign a neutrality agreement, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge, local politicians, we want you to blow this thing up? Well, I could see it happening, but you'd have to be something of an extraordinary conspiracy theorist to believe it, given that Volkswagen is unionized elsewhere, and I guess came out on the wrong end of things. Although, I guess, if they had cut a deal and they said, local politicians, we need you to torpedo this thing, and we get you if you need to threaten us with things, just so long as you're not actually serious about threatening us with those things, you can use any rhetoric you want. Well, that is a little conspiracy theory-ish for me. But it is entirely possible, of course, that the company knew, and maybe they were more interested in a neutrality agreement in order to keep the peace among their own workers, knowing that they were, in fact, in the South, and that they were, in fact, dealing with people who might be divided by their Rush Limbaugh listenership into people who were reflexively anti-union anyway, even though the union could do them much good, and the company thought the union could do much good. But it would drive a wedge between upper management and middle management who are Rush Limbaugh fans if there really were a unionization drive, or at least if it looked like they were taking sides in this thing. So they declared neutrality. And then there's a possible reprimand out there for the UAW who maybe misreads the situation, possibly, and thinking they're bargaining in good faith with the company because all the evidence is there that they are. Agree, there are some concessions that we didn't necessarily have to give in the negotiating process, but let's do it because we don't necessarily, if the workers are telling us that they don't initially have to press for a pay raise right away, then let's take that off the table and see if we can just have a straight conversation about problems that the workers do currently say they have with the company, and that they're addressable, because we've got a company who on its face is saying, let's have that discussion. That's okay. So why not meet them in the middle? And I guess, just to relate this to the sorts of things we talk about on Daily Kos all the time, and we have these fights all the time, how progressives ought to act, how we ought to approach problems, etc., how we ought to approach negotiating with Republicans, and many of us have by now reached the conclusion that there is no negotiating with Republicans. You ought not to enter into negotiations with these guys in good faith because there won't be any on their part no matter what they say. And from that perspective, you say, don't sign neutrality agreements with these guys because they're not worth the paper they're written on. Say critics from the left, and critics from the right don't sign neutrality agreements with these guys because even if you do, we will work outside of its framework to undermine the neutrality that we say we're signing on to. The company has its hands tied, it's neutral, but that doesn't mean we can't, as a personal matter, do all the same dirty work that we wish the company was doing, but the company has written itself out of. Why do we want to do that dirty work? Because Rush Limbaugh. All right. Well, maybe they even have better ideas. Maybe they have their own thoughts about these things. It is possible, but I doubt it. Anyway, that left them free to sabotage it themselves. It's just another tool that they have, and I guess that wasn't anticipated from the UAW. And maybe that's a failing, or maybe it was a calculated risk. And the difference between calculated risk and outright failing is, that's the dividing line we find in our primary wars over at Daily Kos, in our negotiations over filibuster reform at Daily Kos, and everything else. I don't know. Interesting dividing line. Glad we got to take a look at this one. This was a widely circulated article. Raises some good questions. And, I don't know how much of it answers, but it reignited some old passions in the progressive/labor space. All right. Well, with the end of the show coming quickly, let's give a little plug to what else happens here after a show, the Kagro in the Morning show goes off the air on days that aren't Tuesday. As you know, on Tuesday, I'm always reminded to promote Fripp's show, his kicking ass show with Fripp and Steve, and he sends me nice plugs in order to facilitate that. And I often will get one to remind you of Hip Hump Day Wednesday, as they call it, on the after show with Wink and Justice. But get what? The after show actually takes place most days, most weekdays, at noon Eastern and 9 a.m. Pacific time following this, which is why I am always exhorting you to keep the show and keep the station on all damn day long. Now, I've missed my usual musical cue by about 15 seconds. So my 15-second delay that we built, you don't need to know about the background of this stuff. Doesn't make a difference to you. You finally got back to hear the show live after we got caught in an endless loop. That's all that matters to you. But yes, the after show on today, just 1 hour after we go off the air, and I'm pretty sure that they won't be stuck in an endless loop. Want to hear from the guys that make Netroots Radio run? They are each day so kind to let me bring you these stories. Why not hear what they have to say? Because, believe me, Justice has comments all the time. Only some of the times am I able to squeeze them into the conversation. But, he fills the whole show. Stay tuned to Netroots Radio. If you can't, because you're listening on We Act Radio in Washington, D.C., okay, well, you can pick up the podcast later on. Of course, you can also turn on the live stream, which you'll find at our radio vertical over at Daily Kos, and you can find very easily at netrootsradio.com. How easy is that? Listen to both at the same time and see what happens. I don't know. It's an interesting experiment. Stay tuned. Thanks very much, Justice, for sticking with us through our technical difficulties today. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm starting to think that maybe Friday is a little shaky due to personal business, but we'll handle it as it comes. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for listening.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show with David Waldman.
Background briefing with Ian Masters. This tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Netrootsradio.com.
Hello and welcome to Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the deteriorating situation in the dangerously polarized country of Venezuela, where President Maduro is cracking down on student demonstrations while blaming the U.S. for conspiring against his government. Virginia Lopez, a Caracas-based journalist who covers Latin America and Venezuela for the UK Guardian, joins us to discuss the arrest of an opposition leader who led demonstrations and the government's apparent inability to deal with or take responsibility for an economy with 56% inflation, shortages of food and basics like toilet paper, and security for citizenry facing the worst crime and murder rate in the world. Then we'll look into overpaid CEOs, the president's modest proposal in the recent State of the Union for a MIRA, or My IRA, and remarks by former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers calling for changes in the tax code that allows a far greater share of the income of the rich to escape taxation than the poor and middle class. Dean Baker, the co-director of the Centre for Economic and Policy Research, joins us to discuss his article at the UK Guardian, True Free Market Proponents Should Support Private-Public Competition, and his article at the Huffington Post, Corporate Cronyism, The Secret to Overpaid CEOs. Then finally we'll speak with Bill Zimmerman, an author, longtime activist, and political media consultant who has a new ebook, The Student Loan Swindle, Why It Happened, Who's to Blame, How the Victims Can Be Saved, and an article at the Huffington Post, How to Save the Victims of the Student Loan Crisis. We will discuss his call to action for victims of the $1.1 trillion student debt crisis and his plan to rescue an indentured generation that is fair to both bankers and borrowers alike. And joining us now from Caracas, Venezuela, is Virginia Lopez, who is a Caracas-based journalist who covers Latin America and Venezuela for The Guardian of the United Kingdom and Sky TV. Welcome to Background Briefing, Virginia Lopez.
Hi, how are you?
And every time I call you, Virginia, it's always bad news. And apparently the news is getting worse now in Venezuela. The polarization that's been going on now for over a decade has reached a point where massive demonstrations, the students are demonstrating. Apparently there have been a number of people shot, and now an opposition leader is being hunted down by the government, and he's being accused of fomenting social unrest, and the government's just kicked out 3 U.S. consular officials that they blame for all of this unrest. At what point does Maduro take responsibility for anything that's happening in his country?
Well, I'll just start by telling you that the opposition leader that was being hunted down has been just held by authorities about an hour or so ago. He was heading a protest of peaceful demonstrators, and